this series together. Before we jump in, just a few introductory remarks. A couple of months ago, I had a conversation with actually my friend Q, who is on as a panelist, just about the need for our city and, quite frankly, our state and our country to do a much better job of reaching toward equity for all Americans and all New Yorkers, including those with disabilities. It's my strong feeling that all of us have differences, but that is a reason for us to seek to understand each other, uplift each other, and where there are issues, try to solve those problems. And so that's also a function, I think, of government. And so we're having this conversation for the purpose of lifting up these issues, and not just lifting them up, but really trying to help solve some of them. So in the public advocate's office, where I'm pleased to be the first deputy public advocate, we have the power, for example, to introduce legislation, to engage in investigations of the agencies, to write reports, et cetera. And I see this series, this conversation, as helping us, not just as a public advocate office, but really as a city government and as concerned New Yorkers, again, just do that better job of reaching toward equity. And once again, I want to thank all of you for joining. I do want to introduce our really fantastic friends who have agreed to have a discussion with us. And then we'll go into some questions. Just so folks know, after we engage in some guided questions, we'll then take some questions from you, the public, and see if we can tackle them. I will say, if there are questions that we don't get to or we can't answer for whatever reason, I'm committed to following up with whoever asked the question. So just give us your contact information, and I'll make sure that our team does follow up. So thanks so much. And actually, I have a few introductions of our panelists and other folks who are helping to put this together. Just give me 1 second. Actually, a quick procedural statement. Before we begin, I would like to make everyone aware of the closed captioning services and ASL interpreters we have available for tonight's discussion. Our ASL interpreters are Cheryl Henderson and Rita Jo Scarcella. Cheryl is a light-skinned interpreter of moderate age with shoulder-length brown hair and a black top and blazer. Rita is a plus-size, light-skinned woman with medium-length blonde hair wearing a purple shirt. Closed captioning can be found directly on the Zoom call screen, which will be provided by Rebecca Coster. And again, I'm Nick Smith, First Deputy Public Advocate, and I'm a dark-skinned Black male. I'm seated in a chair with a white shirt, gray suit, behind a podium, a blue podium. As I just said, we put the series together to take a louder stance in our advocacy and outreach efforts to the disability community. We want to provide space for this community to have a voice and express needs that must be met and further met. Our first discussion in this series happened early in December, and it provided a broad overview of who is a part of the community and some of the hurdles that still exist in our city. We began the next discussion in this series, titled, as Tish mentioned, Beyond the ADA, that will focus on public transportation and digital inclusion. Our office has focused on this in the past, including, by the way, introducing Introduction 1861. So that's a bill introduced, legislation introduced, 1861, that would establish, when passed, a digital inclusion officer in every city agency and mandate that city websites update to the latest version of web content accessibility guideline standards as they are, in fact, updated. However, we know there's much more that must be done. We also begin the second discussion with invited panelists because of the work we have done with them in the past, and we know the work that they are doing in their communities. We asked them to share their experiences and the work they have done within the community. We acknowledge that these panelists represent only a portion of the community. Before I introduce the panelists, I want to thank all that have helped put this together from the Office of Public Advocate, including Hadil Mashal, Muriel Clifford, Tish Theodore Green, Isabella Sadej, Wesley Paisley, and Josinia Dominguez. And with that said, let's allow our panelists to briefly introduce themselves, and then I will go into some of our guided questions. Let's start with Quemuel Arroyo, who is the Global Head of Community at Charge and the former Chief Accessibility Specialist and ADA Coordinator for New York City's DOT. Q, you have the floor for your introduction. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Nick, and thank you all for having me today. It's a pleasure to be here. As Nick said, I had the pleasure of serving as the first Chief Accessibility Specialist at New York City DOT. I myself am a New Yorker with a disability, use a wheelchair after a spinal cord injury. So accessibility and disabilities are very near and dear to me. It's a lived experience on a daily basis. And I know firsthand the struggles, trepidations, trials, but really I also see firsthand all the improvements and all, the gaps that still exist as I try to leave my apartment on a daily basis, get from Harlem, downtown, all the way to Brooklyn to see my friends and just hang out, because that's what's missing from the discussion at large. People with disabilities hang out. They do everything that everybody else does. And so hats off to you, Nick, and your entire team at the Public Advocates Office for taking the stance to have these discussions and really showcase how accessibility could be improved. Give hats off to the improvements that have happened, but remind us all that there's a lot that can be done to improve the quality of life and really level the playing field so that New Yorkers with disabilities have access to all that the city has to offer.
Thank you so much, Q. Now, Anita Cameron, who is out in Rochester. I know that, so thank you for joining us from Rochester, and the Director of Minority Outreach for Not Dead Yet. Anita, you have the floor for your brief introduction. I think you're
there we go.
There you are.
Thank you.
No problem.
Thank you. Good evening. Thank you for inviting me. My name is Anita Cameron. I am Director of Minority Outreach for Not Dead Yet. First, a description. I am a Black woman with long dreadlocks that's pulled back. I have headphones on so that I can hear. I'm wearing an orange hoodie, and I have just a plain wall as my background. I live in Rochester, New York, but currently, but I have lived around the nation. I am a member of a group called ADAPT. I've been a member of ADAPT for 35 years, and I joined in 1986. Access to public transportation was the first thing that we worked on, and so I was involved in the fight for accessible public transit. Did some of the demonstrations and protests to fight for the Americans with Disabilities Act. I participated in the Capitol crawl and the arrests at the Rotunda. If you don't know ADAPT, we are known for our nonviolent civil disobedience and direct action. So I've been arrested 139 times in 35 years. I actually started out in Chicago. I worked for Chicago Transit Authority. But over the years and decades, I've served on a number of commissions and committees in various cities and states on transportation issues. Transportation is one of my passions. So thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Anita. Now let's introduce Michael Ring, a New York City board member at Disabled in Action. He's also a transit accessibility activist as well. So Michael, you have the floor for your brief introduction. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Michael Ring. I'm a moderately aged a white guy. I'm wearing an orange t-shirt, and behind me is some books and a door. Being disabled is something that happened recently to me, about 6-7 years ago. So I can see the world from both sides. I work with transportation issues and voting rights issues. I work Disabled in Action and the downstate chapter of ADAPT. And I'm an advocate for people with other disabilities. And there's a variety of disabilities out there that I found out. And I have mostly it's an upper limb disability. I have nerve damage in my hands right now.
Thank you, Michael, for sharing your story and joining us tonight. So really, as you all just heard, we have just a really fantastic set of panelists. I'm looking forward to this discussion. And let's jump in right now with a few of those questions. And let's see, we'll start with the topic of public transportation, in fact. And as I go through the questions, panelists, I'm not going to call anyone in particular unless we get to that point, but just feel free to jump in and give us your perspective. And we'll go from there. So the first guided question is this. How has public transportation become more accessible over the years? And what barriers in public transportation still exist for people with disabilities? Anyone can jump in on that one.
I could start.
Thanks.
I spent a year in a wheelchair and I still have a hard time using stairs. A great barrier to taking the subway in New York City is that you don't know if that elevator is going to work on the other side. And you don't know if you're going to be able to transfer. So it's not dependable. With an independable transportation system, you can't count on it to get to a job. You don't know, you don't want to get to work and then not be able to get home. You don't want to have to call the fire department to get you out of the subway. Having 25% of the stations accessible is a huge barrier. And having elevators that may or may not work is not acceptable.
I'm in agreement. Thank you for that, Michael. And you mentioned the interesting statistic of 25% of stations being accessible, and that means what 75% in the system are not.
They're not. And the other statistic the MTA likes to be proud of is that the elevators work 98% of the time, but you don't know what that 2% of the time is going to be. So if you need an elevator to get on and off and maybe to transfer, so you have to take 5 or 6 elevators a day. If 2% of the time they're not going to work over the course of a week, it's kind of more likely than not that one of them won't work. So you can't count on going to work if you need the elevator on a regular, to get to work.
Understood. Let me ask a quick follow-up before we go to Q and or Anita on that topic, Ashley. So this is, I think to most of us, and I believe many New Yorkers, sort of an obvious problem. So it seems that, the MTA, and then there's a dispute over who runs the MTA, whether it's the mayor of the city of New York or the governor of the state of New York, or both, or some hybrid leadership model, would have long ago taken steps along with, of course, the MTA board to increase accessibility. So before we go to Q and or Anita, give us your sort of perspective on that in terms of, what you've seen, your awareness of if there have been changes, and if there haven't go ahead. Yep.
The subways, it's 100 years old. And, when they built it, accessibility didn't exist. There was no thought to put in elevators, maybe for the super deep stations. But right now, the state, I believe it's a state agency, the city might own the land. That's a fight that I'm not going to get involved in. But they're saying it costs too much to rebuild every subway station, and they want to do it over the next 30 or 50 years. My feeling is if they want to do it, right now, interest rates are as low as they ever have been, and people are unemployed. I don't know why they just don't borrow the money now and hire people who want to work to do the construction and put in the elevators. So it just tells me that it's not a priority. That's they don't care.
Thank you so much, Michael. Let's see. Anita, do you have anything or Q on that question? And feel free to jump in.
Well, for me, it's improved a lot. I remember when there was no accessible public transportation, and remember blocking buses and all to make them accessible across the nation. I've lived in several cities. I'm from Chicago. I've lived in Sacramento, California, Denver, Colorado, which is a home of ADAPT and one of the first cities to become uh, fully accessible in their transportation. I've lived in Washington, D.C., Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and now here in Rochester. And it really depends on what city you're in. In Denver, they're pretty uh, resistant at first, but as I said, it became one of the first um, fully accessible cities. Chicago had a lawsuit shortly before the Americans with Disabilities Act passed to make their transportation system accessible. Um, Here in Rochester, um, our our transit system is it's buses. Um, and many decades ago, Rochester had a trolley, but they don't have that now, so it's buses. And here in Rochester, the big problem for us, the system is accessible, but it's the attitude of our transportation agency, RTA, Regional Transportation Authority. The culture is not a good, culture towards people with disabilities. And the attitude is if you don't like it, or well, don't write it. So it's taken years and years and years for us to kind of move that dial a little bit, um, on accessibility and on the attitudes of the transit authority, because if you start from the top down with this culture of a bad attitude, it's not going to bode well for people with disabilities. And so we're still working here in Rochester to uh, make it so that our transportation authority willingly works with people with disabilities to make
Mhm,
our system better.
mhm. Gotcha. Thank you so much, Anita. Yep.
We heard some really interesting things from Michael and Anita, and I don't, having been someone who was an insider at New York City DOT and worked closely with MTA officials, I know for a fact that no one at the MTA is sitting back saying, wow, like this is amazing. Everyone that I encountered there said, this is good. We're proud of 25, and we know that we have a long way to go. And I still have yet to meet that person that's sitting back saying, we did a good job, and we could pause here, and that goes for the mayor, the governor's team. Everyone's really understanding that, what, like Anita said, we need to pay more attention to people with disabilities, because the persons with disabilities are everywhere. Here in New York City, an estimated 11% of the population is a New Yorker with a disability. That's over 900,000 New Yorkers, and let's not even talk about the 10 million visitors that come here annually, and other people with disabilities that come to the city that want to hang out, spend money, pay tax whenever they buy a drink at a bar, go to Times Square. We need those benefits. And what I see as, I see huge improvement over the past, several decades. For once, we see people like the MTA, New York City DOT hiring people with disabilities that are going to change that attitude that Anita was speaking about. And that's the biggest change that I think has impacted my life personally. Bringing people with disabilities to the table, bring that voice, that experience, and that expertise to know what's needed. One of my biggest pet peeves was the taxi of tomorrow that the Bloomberg administration rolled out. It's a horrible system, but hey, guess what? Even as a horrible system, I feel like I'm a caged dog when I'm sitting in the back of that van in my wheelchair. At least I can get a cab on my wheelchair, and other people with electric wheelchairs are able to get into a cab. Are we happy with the number of cabs that are accessible today? No. But you know who else isn't happy? The commissioner of the TOC isn't happy with those numbers, and she's working daily to bring those numbers up. So I see huge improvement.
Mhm,
And let's not forget the role of the Department of Transportation in public transit, because for anyone to get from their home to their jobs, they have to walk a sidewalk, roll a sidewalk, And the streets of New York have become more accessible with adaptive signals, APS, accessible audible pedestrian signals, sidewalks being improved, curb cuts. The city just settled several years ago. It was just 2-3 years ago that the city settled a landmark settlement for over $7 billion to be invested in right-of-way accessibility. Those are huge improvements. So I see the city going in the right direction. And as a New Yorker who benefits from those decisions daily, I can tell you that, I'm for it.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Q. That was a pretty good summary. So thank you all of you for tackling that first question. And just a reminder, as we go through several of the questions, we do want to talk, as you all just have, so I'm just reaffirming practical solutions, including, by the way, what legislation can the Public Advocate's Office and or our colleagues pursue in the city of New York. And, Anita, you have so much experience in different cities across the nation. Q, of course, and, of course, Charles now, and then of course at DOT, Michael at Disability Action. So I know you all have different ideas here. We really want to focus on those concrete solutions, including legislation. So as we're thinking about the questions, do keep that in mind. In that light of the next guiding question is, in a perfect world, what does it take for a city like New York to be equitable when it comes to public transportation?
I'll go ahead and get us started here, just because I do have bold and audacious goals for the city of New York. We are the greatest city in the world. So why shouldn't New Yorkers with disability be afforded the same access to greatness that the city has to offer? So my definition to that, Nick, would be the ability to leave your home on your own time and get to where you want to go, because the city has made it so that you can be an independent pedestrian, no matter what physical situation you may find yourself. So from a legislative point of view, what does that mean? That means enforcement for property owners to maintain an accessible path of travel in front of their buildings. That means city DOT doing right by this settlement and investing those $7.5 million, despite other interests that come about, because there are many interests in the city of New York. Now, let's not forget, this is a city that has a close to $90 billion annual operating budget. So the money's there. So let's keep, the foot to the pedal and move forward on these adaptive agendas. But lastly, what that really looks like is including New Yorkers with disabilities everywhere you go, from Shea Stadium all the way to Brookfield Place and up to, Riverdale, everywhere, Van Cortlandt Park, and making sure that every services that are available there are afforded to New Yorkers with disability.
Yeah, right on. Thank you, Q. Anita or Michael, you can jump in. Let's start with Anita and then Michael.
A perfect world to me, and I'd second what Q said, but as someone who's used a wheelchair for 15 years and who still uses one part-time, you talk about access, a pathway to transit. That means also shoveling your pathways and making sure that the businesses do that, and making sure that the transit authority does that. If that is your responsibility, do it. Don't I've lived in too many cities where it's kind of kicked back and forth. Who keeps those sidewalks clear? And as someone who has been stranded in the street, oftentimes I get off the bus and I'd be across the street from my job, and I'd have to call and say, hey, can you come get me? Because they haven't cleared the paths. I'm stuck in my wheelchair. So to do that, because not only it's safe for everyone, including people with disabilities. I've heard too many stories of people with disabilities who have been injured or even killed because they are forced to be in the streets because of unplowed. So in a perfect world, we, you know, that's something that we need to look at as well, to make sure that the transit authorities, who who's operates the bus stops and things of that nature, that they make sure that that's cleared, of snow in the winter, or if it kind of floods a bit, to make sure that that's cleared so that people with disabilities, indeed all people, are safe.
Thank you. So before we go to Michael, and maybe he could jump in on this follow-up to Anita, I'm actually, this is another, and it seems like an obvious point, again, to use the word obvious, when you talk about literally clearing paths. So actually, Q, having experience, having worked at at DOT, what's your angle on that? And Michael, you have any comments on that as well, from the New York City perspective? Just literally about what you see in terms of the external infrastructure to make it easier for folks to move around the city.
That is a hot topic, Nick, and it's one that I fought often at DOT, and it's one that the mayor's office has never been responsive about. And it's a question that I want to bring forward to all the mayoral candidates, because there's someone running for office today whom 6 years ago I said to them, I'm a New Yorker with a disability. What do I tell my boss when I literally cannot leave my block because no curb ramp has been cleared? Because a curb ramp is no man's land, because there is no owner beyond the city. And the response I got was, the city needs 8 to 12 hours to clear snow. And I said, so that's what I should tell Morgan Stanley? And no one has found an answer to that. Not DSNY, not DOT, and not the mayor's office. So whose responsibility is it to get New Yorkers across the road when the roads are full of snow?
Wow. So I'll say this, and then we'll go to Michael if you have something on this follow-up question. That's a gap that, if I've ever heard one, and I heard some of these gaps in our last conversation, and I think this evening that's the second one that feels like, what? This seems like such common sense. I would say cue into our panelists. Let's absolutely follow up to see, like, the who, what, where, when, what. Like, I want to delve into that, because if there's a way that we can move the needle on such a simple concept, I think we should just do it, right? So let's talk more after this panel. Thank you for bringing that up, Anita and Q. Michael, you want to jump in on that one?
Yeah, if I have to get from point A to B and 98% of it is snow plowed, you can't cross. If someone's house is abandoned or a store didn't open that day and they didn't shovel, you can't get there. There's no backup plan for clearing the sidewalk in the middle of the block, even, or not just the crosswalks. It would be nice if a neighbor would go out and clear it, or the store next door, but it doesn't happen. But in thinking of what the perfect world for accessibility is like, reminds me, I was at an MTA board meeting and we were talking about elevators, and the board meeting, I think it was up on the 20th floor, an upper floor of 2 Broadway. And it was a whole fleet of elevators to get everyone to the meeting. No one had to think twice that the elevator wouldn't work, because there was half a dozen of them in the lobby. And I brought up, I said, you all got up here, all the board members, but what if there was only one elevator and it probably smelled like human waste? Would you come to work every day? And that's how I feel. Like, if we want a perfect world, we need multiple elevators in every subway. Accessoride and buses are not the answer in New York City. It's a lot of money, but it'll make disabled people a lot more productive. They'll go to work.
Yeah, I mean, and I hear your point about a lot of money. And, again, I know Q, having worked at DOT and both of you in your different roles, and of course, myself and our team in the public advocate's office, budgets are moral documents, right? You hear that a lot. And it seems to me that we can't always rest on, and this isn't like about you, Mike, I'm saying in terms of policymakers, we can't always rest on, we can't do it in the next, ever, or the next, 5, 10, 15 years, because it costs a lot of money. Quite frankly, and this is where it goes into solutions and with the federal level in particular, that isn't an excuse. Q mentioned the city budget of $90+ billion, and it ranges up to like 95, I think last year, $billion. There's a state government, there's a federal government. We're talking about what seemingly are a set of obvious improvements that would make our constituents in New York family move around the city smoothly like anyone else. And that's what we got to push for. And so, I hear the money thing a lot in different policy arguments, but when I hear that, I just picture the people that could be positively affected. And it's like we're driving right by them. We can't do that anymore. And so, there's a new administration in Washington, and we're in touch with their team. So I want to work with you two and wider folks in the community to one, push for additional monies for these programs that you're identifying. So even on that point, I want to talk to all of you after this discussion about the finance portion on top of the ledge and the agency changes, but the money piece is also critical. I think if we can elevate that, hopefully we can make some positive changes. So that's a great point, Michael. Thank you for that.
You asked what a perfect world.
Anita, I was thinking also, I've served on transportation commissions in Washington, D.C. and several cities. They have this concept called redundancy, when so certainly a new construction of stations and things of that nature, built into it shouldn't cost that much. It certainly costs far less than adding extra elevator. So redundancy is you build at least 2 elevators in one station so that, if one goes down, you're not stuck, and it certainly in new construction that should be built into, so yeah, that's something, to be thought of, especially if MTA is going to be renovating stations and things of that nature. And like I said, if you put that in on the ground floor, it shouldn't hurt the budget too much. It'd certainly be far less expensive than having to go back and add on something. And same with escalators and things of that nature, redundancy, if the station is large enough, so just some thoughts.
Hey, Nick,
Yep.
if I can get back to something that Michael said that, has been on my mind a lot. I live here in Harlem, so, and I use the 125th station a lot on the A line and the subway does smell like pee at best. And we cannot have a conversation about the quality of life and the experience in the subway without talking about mental health issues. And you cannot talk about your issue, Michael, without talking about the fact that issue that you're speaking of, which I encounter weekly, is an outcome of the city's neglect on mental health. Because the people who are creating that issue are people who need mental health services, are not getting those services. And this is their last resort for comfort, for warmth, for safety.
Mm-hmm.
And when you say things like, there's poop in the elevator, I have 2 thoughts. I have, the city has done a crappy job on providing for people with mental health. And my second thought is, the city of New York is one of the only major cities in the world that I can think of that doesn't have robust public restrooms. You go to any city, elsewhere, other parts of other countries, Chicago, Seattle, they have public restrooms. Why does New York City not have public restrooms?
Yeah.
I mean, I know the answer, but give these people a place to pee so that the elevators in the subway aren't full of piss and poop.
Yeah, 5 letters popped up in my head when you asked the question, NIMBY.
You'd be surprised.
Yeah, I guess that's possible. So just a reminder for our members of the public, do drop your questions in the chat. What we'll do, I'm going to shift it just a bit because we're going to shift to a different subject in a minute. So if there are questions on public transportation, let's do those in a minute. I'm going to go to the last question in this section, and then we'll do the Q&A for the topic of public transportation. Then we'll do the other topic. So do drop your questions in the chat now and then, and then raise your hand as well if you can on the system. Okay, so a couple last questions on the topic of public transportation, and then shifting over to digital inclusion. So what technology advances could the city and private actors adopt to alleviate the barriers that people living with disabilities face during an emergency situation? For example, having more smart traffic signals.
You know, that's a great question, Nick. And it's really speaking to inequities that we don't even think about, like the fact that there are hundreds of thousands of New Yorkers with low vision, New Yorkers who have no vision, or New Yorkers with cognitive disabilities who might not take in information like you and I might. And I always think about a place like the Staten Island Ferry. You know, if there's an emergency, how is a person who's blind going to find out? There is no ASL on the ferries. There is no ASL, you know, in any EDC ferry. And this is a hot, sexy, brand new project that omits these very reasonable, like ground level conversations of how a New Yorker with disability conveyed information in case of emergencies. And two, what services have been provided to get New Yorkers with disabilities out of an emergency situation? You know, people don't talk enough about how smartphones have been the hottest thing for the low vision or blind pedestrian since sliced bread. Because of an iPhone, persons with low vision are now able to become independent pedestrians because they're able to access things like Google Walks and get from point A to B with a navigator in their ear. And there's so many accessible features that this phone provides people that we need to stop using this misnomer that persons with disabilities don't have access to technology. Technology is a great tool that can get people greater independence and get them where they want to be. So let's start building platforms via tech services to get people information and get them to safety when in need.
I love that. And that sounds like a potential private sector, public sector hybrid or partnership. And, you know, you're, again, interesting in the sense that you've got experience both in the public sector and the private sector. So how do you think the city, and, you know, from our purchase public advocate in the government, how can we help move the government in a way to develop these tools? Is it, you know, talking in charge, or how do you think that works conceptually? And then we'll bring in Anita and Michael as well on the question.
That is a fascinating frame that you put out there, Nick. And here's what I've learned, being someone that's dabbled in both areas. Government is extremely apprehensive to deal with the private sector because they think the private sector is just trying to make money. However, the private sector has the money to be innovative and creative and come up with solutions that are good for the public, for everybody out there. So we need to build trust. The private sector cannot do their job without government. You know, my company cannot come to the city of New York without a permit from DOT. DOT needs to understand that they themselves don't have the money or capacity to build charging stations and put them out in the street. And they should really welcome the private sector to do that for them and incentivize the private sector to be innovative and provide the tools that are necessary for the city to be, you know, forward thinking and progressive. And on the opposite, private corporations have got to, yes, I understand you have investors, you need to make a profit, you need to have good reports on every quarter, but there's a need that's not being serviced out here that you can make money out of. I just saw in the chat earlier, our money is green. You know, Commissioner Khaleesi loves to say, I may be disabled, but my money's not. And my money's green just like everybody else's. And the private sector needs to wake up to that, because I may be a New Yorker with a disability, but guess what? I travel, I go out to restaurants, I go to hotels, and I take Ubers too. You know, so there's plenty of ways to get my money, but I'm only going to do it where I feel welcome and where I feel I belong.
Thank you. Anita and or Michael, and then we'll shift to a different subtopic.
You know, interesting that you talk about emergencies. and emergency preparedness. That is another one of my passions. And I have done a lot with emergency preparedness for people with disabilities in Denver and DC and here in Rochester. I think one of the things that we need to do is within if if in if there are any citizens commissions or whatever, um, they need to look at the emergency preparedness component. For example, I served on the mayor's commission for people with disabilities in Denver, Colorado, and I brought to the commission the idea that people with disabilities, um, we not only need to be served before, during, and after disasters, but that we need to sit on those commissions and boards so that we can give the expertise on how to serve us, and then we in turn can serve our communities. So perhaps some commission or committee of of citizens, of businesses, of governmental agencies, hey, including your state FEMA or whatever, form that commission. Because what happens to people with disabilities in in, in an emergency? How do you get them? How do you get a bunch of wheelchair users out of a subway when something's happened and the power is, out? How do you deal with that? So I think, that's a situation where the city and the community can work together on disability, I'm sorry, on disaster preparedness, both on the technical end and things that can inform people with sensory disabilities, or cognitive disabilities, and that kind of structural, what happens during, an emergency.
Thank you, Anita. Michael?
Well, this question made me realize that we're all kind of numb to the fact it's been so long that we are in a state of emergency. I mean, we're in a pandemic. So I'm thinking of the way, what happened in March and April. People with disabilities were left out of help. There was enormous confusion. People who were stuck in their houses, some knew how to get food delivered, some didn't. Sometimes the food came, but it wasn't the food that people could eat. Um, I mean, I think the city did as well as it could, but a lot of people were left helpless. I mean, and in need of a lot of help. I hope people looking back and looking about how to do it better. Not saying it wasn't done very well, but there was a lot of room for improvement. But this is still a state of emergency. Now that the vaccine is going out, some people with disabilities, well, don't know if they're on top of the list, the middle of the list. Does my disability apply? I don't know about my disability, if I'm being bumped up the list, or, it is an emergency.
Yeah, thank you for that, Michael. Okay, so I'm going to pause there for 1 second. This has been a fabulous, really great discussion so far. Before we talk about digital inclusion, I want to slow down and pause and see if there are questions that we can tackle now on the topic of public transportation. And by the way, if there are individual case issues, feel free to speak to our team members at gethelp@advocate.nyc.gov, or you can give the office a call at 212-669-7250, and we'll get back to you within 24 hours. That is if there are individual case issues that you'd like to ask about. That's probably better for our constituent service unit at those information. So Tish or Hadil, are there any questions that you want to raise at this point? I see a couple of really good comments. I'm dealing with housing issues, computer literacy, technology literacy.
Looks like Lennon has her hand up.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know how to, let me see. Oh, I see 2 raised hands. Okay, let me see if I can.
Good evening, everyone. I'm really having a problem with housing. And every time I take them to court and I sit in front of a judge, it feels like I'm being stifled. When I'm talking about things, mice running on my children. And mind you, I'm in a disability apartment. I had a Section 8. They told the people they give me the highest level of housing, and they threw my Section 8 out. I'm in nature now. When I'm telling you I'm having problems with them, it's like I can't get on the same page. You tell me to take these steps and put them on the court calendar. The judge, I'm 52. The judge told me to move my stuff in the middle of the floor for a paint job, that I should know that that's what I need to do if I want my stuff to be painted. They make me feel like I'm a retard. Every time I go see a lawyer or someone says I'm supposed to have a lawyer, the lawyer betrays me. I'm not that kind of person, and I keep on telling them I'm gonna be back at the court. I'm at the court so much that they know me. I could buzz. They will wave me through because they know that where I'm going. And the judges are getting mad. You telling me to be quiet, but you're still not letting me finish what I have to say. So when you say something and I interrupt you, I'm not meaning to interrupt you. I'm here because I'm respecting your opinion, because I'm telling you the conditions that I live in are unlivable. It seemed like my landlords harass me. They know I don't do noise. I live over a workshop. When I'm talking about the place, when the door slams, it makes the whole apartment shake. Yep. They're mad at me. When I'm talking about heat, it's unbelievable heat. When I first walked in the door in this apartment, it was fine. They gave me the keys. I think a day or two I came back, the paint was peeling. They tested its lead. My grandkids, I do not let come in this apartment. Not only that, we found mold behind the door. I put in a ticket.
A ticket, yep.
Listen, I put in the ticket. The child got stuck in the room. Called management. Management's a hop, skip, and a jump away from me. Refused to come and let my child out. I had to do 311, had the fire department come. They broke the door. Behind the paint is nothing but mold, and they're getting mad at me. I'm not playing. I'm not playing with them. And I told them, listen, I'm talking, you want me to respect you, then respect me and listen to what I'm saying. I'm not getting that. I called management, told them about the door. They still letting this door slam. I'm never going to be able to enjoy the apartment. Mind you, I'm all the way in the back.
Got it.
I'm all the way in the back laying down. And I told them, you know what? I get migraines. You know this from the other apartment. The Titanic, the other apartment sounded like a Titanic. For 3 years, it was a gas leak in the apartment, and they was mad at me. I've had so many people come to my apartment, I started recording it. This is what happened.
Yeah.
The health department came, the man did not come with his ID. Talking about a lady was gonna, what is this? Say who he is. I told him, no, I recorded him. You're supposed to have your ID or your driver's license when you come in my door, or a tag on you to say who you are.
Okay.
I had the building department come to my house, put the wrong date on the people, on the thing. Listen, I've been through it. I've been doing this since 2009. No,
I can hear that.
I've had people come and tell me that HPD stands outside my door.
Yeah.
The landlord stands outside the door, wait for HPD, pays them off. They don't come. Judge, where's your whatchamacallit? I had a judge tell me, lean across to say they didn't want to come. It's your order. Every time I put in something, they never follow the order. Never follow the order. Never go through with it. I'm back. Right there again. Come on, I'm tired of doing this. I want to be able to enjoy this apartment. This apartment is stressful when I have children.
Right.
I had a nail sticking out the wall that was rusty and kept on brushing my hand, saying, "Oh my God, I set my children away until they fix the apartment." I have to pay for my children to be there.
Let me jump in for one quick second. So, one, quite frankly, your story sounds, as you just said, very stressful. So we're gonna, if you don't mind.
Yeah, always say that and never come through. I'm tired of mixed up. I have feces dropping on me and they get mad because I keep on calling the courts to fix them. I'm not gonna have feces drop on me and my children. I'm tired of them. I'm petrified of them. I don't sleep with mice in my house. It's a lot of things going on. And I think because of my disability and my
Yes.
color, they don't respect me.
I understand. Well, our job, let me be very clear. Our job in the public advocate's office, by the way, charged by Jamani Williams, the public advocate, is to cut through that red tape. So I hear you. We're going to assist. That's the bottom line. So I'm going to ask, do you have, if you have access to a phone or email, I'm going to give you, actually, let's drop it in the chat. Or if you don't have the chat, I will tell you the number. Again, just give me 1 second. So if you don't mind taking this number down, 212-669-7250. Do you have that? 212-669-7250. Or send us an email whenever you can at gethelp@advocate.nyc.gov, and we're going to follow up with you directly. That's our commitment. And I'm very sorry that, you know, you're going through such stress. And this is why we're doing this work. So we're going to follow up with you directly. Thank you so much, Ms. Faison. Okay, I see a couple of other hands, and let's try to take these quickly, and then I want to get to digital inclusion before we wrap for the evening. Let's go to, is that Miriam Fisher?
Yeah. I have a question. I'm not really clear of the answer. When it's icy and it snowed, who is responsible for clearing the intersections? Is it the sanitation department? Is it the nearest storefront? I put earlier in the chat that a few years back, when Catherine Garcia, who is now running for mayor, was the head of Department of Sanitation, there was an open house in my district with de Blasio and Corey Johnson, and it had just had a big blizzard. I asked her, and she said the nearest business, which the stop that I was talking about was about half a block away.
Okay.
The subway was a few yards from the intersection.
Yep.
I suspect that it is the sanitation, and I was not happy to hear from her, who is now running for mayor.
Mhm.
Who
Got
is
it.
responsible?
Good question.
Let's see.
Q, are you able to take that one? Having worked at that DOT, and I know you mentioned a DSNY, DOT, you mind taking that one? And if not, Miriam will follow up.
Yeah, no, that's actually a really straightforward question. The roadways are DSNY's responsibilities. The sidewalks are the responsibility of the adjacent building owners. But if you're talking about the intersection, the street, the roadway, that is absolutely DSNY.
Well, I was talking about both the intersection, but also the subway exit and entrance was just a few yards from the curb, and it was always ice filled. The businesses were about half a block away, much further, and I was trying to get not to the stores, but I was trying to get to the curb, and there was a huge ice. This went on for years. It's across from Central Park. And they were always slow on that side of the street, but I took the other side of the street with the sidewalks not near the park. And it seemed to me that the subway entrance was much closer. That part of the street was much closer to the curb, and the business was all the way in the other direction.
Yeah, I think this is exactly what Nick was talking about earlier, and it sounds like Nick wants to follow up to get to the bottom of, you know, who's responsible for snow removal in the winter months.
Right, we do. And in fact, like I keep saying, legislation among other tools. I want to see, you know, if there's a gray area here or a gap, there's clearly a gap, and no one's taking responsibility. We should put in legislation to force the conversation. So Miriam, could you also get in touch with us as well? My email is given to you here. Is nsmith@advocate.nyc.gov.
Put it on the chat.
Sure, I'll do that.
Put it on the chat, and I'll
sure.
copy it.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Okay, and then I see one more. Let's do one more quick question to Catherine, and then we'll go back to digital inclusion. Catherine.
How you doing, everyone? My name is good evening. My name is Leticia Mojica. I don't speak too much English, but I'm gonna try my best. At the age of 33, 2008, I had a brain surgery. I was not able to work. I was paralyzed from my left side completely, my hand, my foot, everything. At an early age, I couldn't work. All I get from disability is $968 a month. That's not a good income at all. I'm not able to work. On the house that I was living for 15 years in Suffolk, New York, which is in Long Island, on October 26th, it was sold at an auction. The guy who bought the house evicted me on December 2nd of 2020. I ended up leaving. Right now I'm in the Bronx in my friend's house. 3 days, 2 days in my sister's house. She has a family. You know how everyone has their own family, and eventually they cannot have me for long. Right now I'm in this apartment. It's really cold. PRC doesn't give no heat in this building. I am a disabled. I get seizures. I suffer from panic attack. My condition as being disabled is very bad. I have put so many applications for Housing Connect, and it's ridiculous. I feel discriminated because they I am eligible because obviously they get my application. I have my proof of all my emails that they call me and they let me know, oh, you disabled? Oh, that's what you get from the disability, social security disability. You're not eligible because you don't qualify with the requirement. It's not fair because I know there's so many buildings that they building and they just wanna, like today I got a call from one and they said, well, you got 2,000, do you have $2,500 to pay for a one bedroom? I said, impossible, I can't. You have to help people with disabilities. I feel discriminated because I have so many evidence from so many emails from so many buildings in Bronx, Brooklyn, Harlem that I have been called, but based with the conditions that I have, that's why I feel that I get rejected from all of them, and it's not fair. We should have a fair shot. If I was able to
Yeah,
work, I will go back to work, but I obviously I can.
right.
So that's what I'm facing. That's my situation. So today I got in this shot 45 minutes prior. I didn't know some guy named Michael Share. He got me into this. He said, we're gonna help you.
Hmm.
So that's why I'm here. And that's my story. And that's the situation I'm facing right now. I'm homeless and I don't have nowhere to go. I'm just getting help by friends and my sister because my mom and my dad, they're not here. They in
Hmm.
my country. So that's what I'm facing.
Thank you for sharing. And as I mentioned a couple of times, our literal job as a public advocate's office is to try to assist. Nobody ever wants to overpromise, but based on what you're saying, it seems like something should have been done a long time ago. So, do you mind also getting in touch with us so we can see if we can be helpful in finding some permanency for you? We
Yes,
should.
yes. I,
Great,
I would thank you so much.
not a problem. And thank you for having the courage to share that story.
Can,
I know it's not
can,
easy.
can you give me your contact number before um
Sure, I will. Just give me 1 second. I have to. Okay, it's a 212
yes,
669
669
7250.
7250.
Right. Or you can email get help
Okay. Get help.
at advocate.
I think I have it.
Yeah,
Raymond
exactly.
gave it to me. Raymond gave it to
Great.
me.
Great. Okay. Yeah. Great. 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 So
Yes,
yeah,
he
be in
was.
touch.
Yes.
Okay. Great. Thank you so
And
much.
and before I cut up, I have called every Congress. I have called not call. I have emailed De Blasio. I have emailed you name it, everyone. I'm not gonna stop. I'm gonna keep working on it. I'm gonna for myself, even though if I get the help, I don't get it, but I'm gonna continue. I'm not gonna stop because it's not fair.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate what you're saying. And in terms of your case and you mentioning others, again, our job is to help, and we're not in the business of giving out platitudes and just saying we'll help you without a real effort to do so. So my commitment to you directly and to other folks who have mentioned their stories is to see if we can actually solve these individual cases while we talk about larger systemic issues. Is that all right?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay,
You're welcome.
no problem. So we'll shift in the remaining 20 minutes or so to the final topic of digital inclusion and accessibility and come back to our panel. So panelists, the first question for the digital inclusion / accessibility topic is the following. In what ways does the ADA, which was passed 30 years ago, apply to websites, social media, and digital communications in general? And why don't we start, if it's agreeable, with Anita, and we'll go around from there.
Right, so the ADA, but I think section 508 or something that's come in since, but it says that, you know, we should be able to access. And so now websites um, are supposed to make themselves accessible to people with low vision. Um, they are supposed to make themselves accessible to people with screen readers. Um, if there are um, if there are pictures on the website, they should have what they call alt tags, which is a description in code, so that when the screen reader reads the because it can't read the image where the image is, it'll show up as text, and then it'll provide, you know, a description, um, you know, of that image. So, you know, that's what they're supposed to. Not all websites though are accessible, and I think that they're still working on accessibility. Um, you know, I think it's kind of it kind of took off really kind of a few years, you know, after the ADA was passed into law and implemented. So, um, and there are some websites and whatnot that do guidelines on web accessibility that exists, but like I said, a lot of sites still are not accessible, and we have to um, continue to work on that. Most folks, when they, you know, are businesses or the like, when they hear that their sites aren't, and find out that it's, you know, it's relatively easy to do if you have an IT department, or, you know, even a webmaster can do simple things to make your website accessible.
Thank you, Anita. Michael or Q, you want to jump in on this one?
You know, the reality is that the ADA was not designed to capture this robust world that we're living in today. However, there has been the development of WAC guidelines, or web content and accessibility guidelines, which pretty much spell out, you know, the what's a worldwide established guide for technical accessibility, which is, you know, website and all their content must be perceivable. You know, everyone can see things and more, however they can see. If it's just hearing, writing, it needs to be operable. Everything needs to work for everyone, understandable and robust, making everything roll up to the newest hardware and not break. You know, and that's, you know, WAC 2.0. So you've now seen a versioning of lawsuits against hotels or any consumer websites that a low vision or blind person says, hey, I'm a consumer, I'm a user, I need access to this platform, and you're not providing that. So you know, 508 is still being developed, but WAC 2.0 is the most robust web accessibility guidelines that you're going to find out there today.
Got it. Thank you, Q. Mike, are you going to jump in on this? Or
Yeah, I'd like to follow up on a word that Q used. It's lawsuits. No one has to follow the law until they're sued when it comes to the ADA. Some do, many do, but a lot of people, it never occurs to them to make an accessible website. And you might get some satisfaction by complaining, or, you know, letting this business know their website is not accessible, but you have to jump to a lawsuit. The ADA doesn't have a police department. You know, you have to sue someone to make things happen.
That's one of the major failings, I believe, of the Americans with Disabilities Act is that the enforcement is not robust. It's pretty weak. And it depends on people with disabilities to be the watchdogs and to make the complaints and all. And unfortunately, there's been legislation proposed like HR 620 um, that would gut the Americans with Disabilities Act. It was passed in the House. Unfortunately, I was there in the gallery when it was passed, but it didn't pass in the Senate. And so ultimately it failed, but unfortunately, there are still entities, even state or local entities that are convincing some of these federal legislators to create laws like that. So uh, that's why I was just kind of following up on what Michael was saying, that unfortunately we are forced to sue. And a lot of us don't have that money. It's not that we don't think of it. We either don't have the money or we don't have access to the organizations or even knowledge of the organizations and resources out there that could put such a, carry out such a lawsuit on your behalf or pro bono or whatever. And so my dream is, if ever the ADA is revamped, that it needs enforcement, because right now it is an unfunded mandate, and that's what people throw in your face all the time about the ADA. Although, it can, we've had victories, and some of these lawsuits are successful. So there's hope. We just, as consumers, as people with disabilities, unfortunately, we have to push, or maybe um, push our legislators, or get some type of ordinance or legislation in there that will buoy, what's already there.
Understood. So that's very interesting. And as you three were speaking about the lack of enforcement and I guess teeth in terms of the federal passed ADA, I immediately began to think, what can we do locally at the City of New York level? I know we have the Mayor's Office for People with Disabilities, MOPD, but that's a mayoral office. I don't know that they have particular enforcement powers, but let's just, I have a couple other questions, but I want to pause here on this topic. How do you think the city itself can better enforce the provisions of the federal ADA? I don't know the state landscape. I see there are state protections. In fact, as I know there are, and local protections. Is there some kind of a agency that we can establish locally? What are your thoughts on local enforcement?
Well, I'm thinking, I used to work, I was a school administrator in my past life. It was a small school, and regularly city inspectors showed up to the building, and I was the go-to guy. They would see me. I mean, the fire department would come and say, we need to make sure all your internal air conditioners have permits and there's no clutter in the room. Fire extinguishers. The Department of Buildings would come and look at the elevator. We'd need a department to look at buildings that, are private buildings that are public, like school buildings or stores, and make sure there's nothing that's inaccessible.
Got it. Yeah,
Could be.
Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, it doesn't have to be the fire department or the health department. It could be a new department.
Yeah, and actually, again, as you were speaking, I'm thinking on the fly, that could also be the New York City Department of Buildings. Maybe there's additional jurisdiction that they could have. And then also, by the way, it could be legislation. Once again, as I'm thinking about practical solutions. So to our team, I hope you don't mind capturing this idea. And then to the panelists, I want to follow up as well on the issue of local enforcement, because it seems that there's a pretty big gap here, even though there are a bunch of relevant entities. I see Human Rights Commission, DOB, et cetera. And Kathleen Collins says there's the HRC and plus DOB should already be doing this. So let's follow up. And Kathleen, I want to include you as well, if you don't mind, in that review. So do get in touch with us as well. That's an interesting point.
it really boils down to how real do you want to get about this, and do you really want to do something here? Because as you said earlier, MOPD did have a staffer. He was so good that he got snatched by Do It, and now there is one person in charge of ensuring that all the cities, I don't know, 800 plus websites are ADA compliant. That's the thing. WAC 2.0 compliant. You have one person for the entire city. That tells me that they don't really care about this. That this is not a priority. This is not something that they want fixed.
So Q, on that point, are you saying that as a possible, pardon the turn of phrase, but quick, for lack of a better phrase now, solution could be at a starting point, Mayor, hire additional staff for MOPD at a basic level?
I mean, I'm sure Victor would love to buy you a beer for just saying that right now.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I have a lot of thoughts. Some of them are controversial on that because I don't believe in the siloing of an issue. When you ghettoize an issue like this, it becomes ignored.
Sure.
I believe that, like the same ethos I had when I was at DOT. I may be the chief accessibility specialist, but accessibility is a job for us all. And we all carry that burden. The minute you give it to one person, there will be overworked, overwhelmed, and it'll be very hard for them to get anything done. This is a shared responsibility that every agency, every department must take on.
Okay, helpful. Let's talk more, and I keep going to this point about practical solutions, about how we move every agency toward that. And I know that, again, we have a bill to establish a digital inclusion officer per agency, but if there are different or more ideas, we want to hear them, Q. So let's continue that conversation as we move toward more practical solutions. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, great. All right, we got about 10 minutes left. We have a couple of more questions on the digital inclusion piece. Let's see what they are. This is an interesting one, and it goes into what Michael was saying earlier about an emergency. How has COVID-19, this pandemic, changed conversations about or around digital inclusion?
Well, Michael got us off on a good topic here, talking about how the gaps that you saw existing before COVID became exacerbated. And people who had access to digital solutions like seamless apps, Uber Eats, they were able to get their food no issue. People who didn't have access to those before the pandemic are now in a much worse place. But beyond that, I'm going to flip that. I agree with you wholeheartedly, Michael, but I'm going to flip that and I'm going to add a positive, because COVID has answered the calling of persons with disabilities for decades who said, I may not be able to show up to an office, but you bet your money I can do the job remotely.
Oh, for sure.
And that's been a great thing for people who work from home for a myriad of reasons. And I think that, I'd be remiss if I didn't say COVID has now debunked that idea and made it so that people with disabilities and others could very easily become gainfully employed and be successful at their jobs from the access of their home or their environments.
But these are people who have access to digital technology. There's still a chunk out there. Like, I'm an Accessoride user, and I was part of the pilot program where I could use an app to summon a taxi cab in real time. I know people who would benefit from this, but they can't use an app. So they can't summon a taxi in real time. They can't get a ride in real time, not because they're not in the program. They couldn't be in the program because they can't use a smartphone. I mean, I don't know what the solution is to that, but
yeah, that's a great flag. Anita, were you going to jump in on that one?
Oh,
okay.
No,
Great.
actually, in the little time we have left, I wanted to circle back on the web accessibility, because we talk about you know accommodations for people with low vision and all. I recently learned about the concept, and it seems simple on the face of it, of simple language. so that just you design your websites with language that is accessible to everyone, because some folks, due to, whether cognitive, intellectual disabilities, or, you know, um, level of education, may not be able to follow all of that complex language or jargon or whatnot that's on the website. And so I'm seeing more and more certain websites. I'm thinking of Autistic Self Advocacy Network, for one, that has, um, they have links to plain language, on some of the things that they're talking about, some of the advocacy issues, some of the concepts. They have a link that you can click on to explain it in plain language. And I think that certainly, for mainstream websites, not necessarily technical or whatnot, but for mainstream websites, that we need to look at that, because if we want our websites accessible to everyone, as my friend Liz Weintraub says, all means all. And so we want our websites accessible not only to folks who are blind or deaf or whatnot, but to folks, who have cognitive disabilities or intellectual disabilities, or, or so. Just another thought that, as we are designing our websites, and certainly I'm thinking about like the city, um, could adopt that practice.
Yeah,
You know,
understood.
and I love that you said that, because it really hits home the fact that accessibility is not just one thing. You know, access takes very many different lenses, and there are many ways to start the path to an accessible platform. And you just spoke about the most low-hanging fruit one, that it's so easy for people to show good faith and to start the process, and to really hit home on the fact that accessibility does not have to be as obtuse as you think, as you're making it. It doesn't have to be that difficult. It's not that hard. You know, if you just take the time to learn and get educated, like Nick and his staff are providing for all New Yorkers through these chats, let's learn about what it really means. And that question alone, it's so rarely asked, Nick. But yes, plain language is such a low hanging fruit, and it goes so far because we forget that our consumers are kids, aging adults, and everybody in between. And
Mhm.
every I, I I hate to even say this, but President 45 was really good at what he did because he used plain language.
Mhm.
You know, so if you use plain language, you hit everybody.
Mhm.
So Anita, kudos to you for bringing that up. Absolutely right.
Thank you. I just want to, as we move toward a wrapping, I want to thank all of our panelists. We, took some questions earlier. I think we are moving toward wrapping due to the time. It's been a really riveting hour and a half conversation. As I said at the last session and this session, these conversations are not just to, get a bunch of folks in front of a camera and talk about what we all, or many of us already know. The point is to raise the issue to those who may not be as versed or well versed on the issue, on the issues, but also move toward practical solutions. So our office intends and will be, after these conversations, well, even now, based on the stuff we are already doing as a public advocate agency, working with you all together in partnership and community to move toward solutions for all New Yorkers, including those with disabilities. And I have to also mention, one of the questioners said a word that, some folks may have found harmful. And I want to say that I apologize for that. And our office works to uplift and empower all people with disabilities, including those with intellectual or developmental disabilities. So it's about equality and equity for all of us. And we are one big New York City and state, Anita, as in Rochester family. I want to thank our panelists. I want to thank you all for tuning in. Our Twitter is twitter.com/NYCOPA. Kudos to our team members again and all of you for this discussion. And we will see you next time on the next version of this program. Thank you all. And I hope you have a great evening. Good night.
Cheers.
Good night.